You became the solution, and nobody asked if that was okay. You're the one they call when something breaks, the one who sends the money before they finish asking, the one who absorbs the crisis, solves the problem, then goes home and can't sleep. Not because you're ungrateful, but because somewhere underneath all that capability, there's a question you don't say out loud. When does someone take care of me? The sibling who drifts, forgiven instantly. The parent who couldn't manage, excused. But you built something, and that became your sentence. This isn't bad luck. This isn't your family being difficult. You walked into a system, a role that was assigned before you ever agreed to it. And guilt became the lock on the door. What you just felt? Rousseau documented it in The Social Contract, the moment obligation replaces genuine choice, and the person carrying the most starts to disappear. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how your competence became a cage and how to walk out of it without losing who you are. Lock this in your mind and drop it in the comments. My ability is not my obligation. Let's begin with what most people never figure out until it's already cost them years. You've probably had this moment. Someone in your family calls in crisis, again. And before they even finish, you're already calculating. Can I cover it? Can I fix it? Can I manage this without falling apart myself? You already know you're going to say yes, not because you want to, because the alternative, saying no, feels like dropping them off a ledge. You're not weak. You're not a pushover. You just got handed a role that nobody named, and guilt made sure you couldn't put it down. Principle 1. The competence tax. Think about the most capable person in any family. Now think about this. Are they the most free? Or are they the most burdened? I call this the competence tax. The more reliable you become, the more you're expected to carry. Not because people are malicious, but because systems route problems toward whoever solves them. You solved, so the problems kept coming. And at some point, helping became the price of belonging. Your nervous system registers family exclusion the same way it registers physical danger. When you imagine disappointing them, saying no, stepping back, that tightness in your chest isn't guilt. It's your survival wiring being used against you. What you just felt, Rousseau saw this exact mechanism. In The Social Contract, he argued that the moment obligation is imposed rather than chosen, it stops being cooperation and becomes coercion, dressed in the language of love. He was describing political systems. He was also describing your Sunday dinner. Here's how it works in 3 stages. Stage 1 is the proof loop. You show competence once, and it becomes the baseline, not the exception, the floor. And anything below it is treated as failure. But that's only the setup. Stage 2 is the quiet raise. The expectations expand without announcement. More money, more emotional support, more showing up. You didn't agree to the increase, it just happened. And once stage 2 is running, stage 3 is the guilt switch. The moment you try to slow down, the framing flips. You're no longer capable. You're selfish. That switch is the real mechanism. It's not about what you did. It's about keeping you moving. Here's what I mean by this. At some point, you stopped being able to tell the difference between what you do because you love them and what you do because you're afraid of what happens if you don't. Those two things got braided together so tightly, you can't find the seam. I call this the love braid. When love and fear of consequences get twisted into the same rope, every time you try to pull back, it feels like you're pulling away from love itself. That's not an accident. It's the most effective trap there is. Hobbes understood this. In Leviathan, he argued that people don't submit out of affection. They submit because the cost of non-compliance becomes unbearable. He was writing about political authority, but the mechanism is identical. When someone can make you feel that your love is on trial every time you try to rest, they don't need force. They have something more powerful. 3 stages. Stage 1 is the merge. Love and duty become indistinguishable. You help because you care, and caring requires helping, endlessly, without ceiling. Stage 2 is the test. Every boundary attempt is framed as evidence you don't really love them. The test is never announced, you just feel it. Stage 3 is the re-entry tax. To repair the rift, you give more than you withheld. Every step back costs double on the way back in. That's not love working. That's a control dynamic dressed as love. Drop this in the comments. I love them. I am not responsible for carrying them. But here's where it gets worse. What I'm about to show you will flip everything you thought you knew about why this keeps happening, specifically to people like you. Real quick, if you're still here, you're not just watching. You're trying to understand something that most people around you will never name. That's not common. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because what's coming next is the part that changes how you read every family conversation you'll ever have. Now, back to what Hobbes helped us see. Here's what you were taught. Taking care of family is love. The stronger one carries more. That's just what good people do. Think about the last time you followed that. What happened? You gave. They received. And the expectation reset immediately to a higher level. That advice didn't protect you. It volunteered you. I call this the virtue trap. The belief that your goodness should have no limits, that capping your sacrifice means capping your love. It sounds noble. It functions as a prison. The contradiction is this. The people who give without limits don't earn more love. They earn less respect. Because the value of anything, including your presence, your money, your energy, is partly set by its scarcity. When you're infinitely available, you become infrastructurally invisible. Machiavelli understood this. In The Prince, he observed that a ruler who gives constantly trains his people to expect giving, and the moment it stops, they feel robbed. Inconsistent favor, he observed, creates more hunger than endless generosity. Not as a blueprint to follow, but as a warning about the system you may already be living inside. He wasn't describing cruelty. He was describing how value actually works in human systems, and your family is a human system. 3 stages. Stage 1 is the virtue signal. You're praised for your sacrifice. The praise feels like love. It is also conditioning. Stage 2 is the new normal. What you gave freely becomes what they're owed. Gratitude fades. Expectation hardens. Stage 3 is the resentment trap. You start to resent them for taking what you kept offering. They start to resent you for pulling back what they'd been taught to count on. Both of you are now trapped inside a dynamic neither of you chose consciously. Stop. Sit with that, because it means the guilt you feel isn't evidence that you're doing something wrong by wanting space. It's evidence that the system is working exactly as designed. And there's one more thing underneath all of this, the part most people never reach. Once you see it, everything clicks into place. Principle 4. The invisible appointment. You were never elected to this role. Think about that. There was no meeting, no conversation, no moment where someone said, "You're capable, so from now on, you're responsible for the stability of this entire family system." It just became true, gradually, without your consent. I call this the invisible appointment. You didn't apply for the position, you were assigned it based on demonstrated competence, and the appointment came with no job description, no hours, no exit clause. Locke wrote about this in his 2 treatises of government. His foundational argument was that legitimate authority requires consent, that any obligation imposed without agreement is not duty, it's coercion. He was writing about governments, but the logic is exact. If you never agreed to be the family's emotional and financial infrastructure, the guilt you feel for not maintaining it is borrowed. It belongs to a contract you never signed. 3 stages. Stage 1 is the assumption. Your competence is visible. Their need is visible. The connection is made for you, silently. Stage 2 is the naturalization. Enough time passes that the role feels biological, like it's who you are, not what you've been doing. Once that happens, Stage 3 is the identity lock. When you try to step back, it doesn't feel like changing behavior. It feels like betraying yourself. That's the lock. And it's the most sophisticated one in the whole system. Say this: I was appointed without my consent. I can renegotiate the terms. Because what's coming next? This is where the map finally shows you the way out. You know that feeling when you help someone and it comes from actual choice? Not fear, not guilt, not the tightness in your chest that says, "What happens if I don't?" Just, "I want to." Full stop. That's not a fantasy. That's what this looks like when you understand the pattern clearly enough to move through it differently. Here's the framework, and it's simpler than you think. Love and obligation are not the same thing. They can coexist, they can overlap, but they are not identical. The moment you can feel the difference, even slightly, the guilt starts to lose its authority. Because guilt only works when you believe that stepping back equals not loving them. Once you can hold both truths at once, I love these people and I am not responsible for carrying them, the mechanism breaks. Machiavelli saw the game. Hobbes explained why the game exists, because people in need will always route toward power, and capable people are power. Locke gave us the frame that matters most. Authority without consent is not authority. It's assumption. And what was assumed can be examined. What was never agreed to can be renegotiated. Remember what I described at the beginning? That moment where you send the money, solve the crisis, smile through it, and then lie awake wondering when someone takes care of you? That's not you being ungrateful. That's you experiencing the terminal stage of the competence tax, running on a contract you never signed, enforced by a guilt you inherited. Here's what shifts. When you stop performing competence out of fear and start offering it from choice, even small incremental choice, the dynamic changes. Not because they change immediately, but because you do. You stop volunteering for the role every time you show up. You start separating love from logistics. You learn that no, said clearly and with warmth, is still love. It's just love with a spine. When you name the love braid, when you can actually feel where love ends and fear begins, you reclaim the ability to give freely, which is the only kind of giving that doesn't quietly hollow you out. That clarity is the foundation. From it, you can renegotiate the invisible appointment, not through confrontation, but through consistent, calm, repeated evidence that you are a person with limits, not a resource without them. You came here feeling like your family's stability sat entirely on your shoulders, and like wanting space made you selfish. You learned that competence gets taxed, not through malice, but through system logic. You discovered that the virtue you were praised for was also the mechanism that kept you trapped. Now you see, the guilt was never evidence of your failure. It was the enforcement mechanism of a role you never chose. This is a map. Maps don't change the territory, but they change everything about how you move through it. You're not the same person who started listening 8 minutes ago. If something in this landed, share it with someone who needs a map right now. They might not have the words for what they're carrying. You just found some. Hit the like button. It's how I know this kind of content is worth making. And subscribe, because there's more of this coming. Every person who understands this changes how they show up in every room they walk into. You're not here by accident. Locke spent his life arguing that no one is born obligated, that dignity requires consent. He wrote it for nations, but it was always also true for families, for capable children, for the person who became everyone's answer before anyone thought to ask what they needed. That's you now, and that changes everything.